Hi everyone, I'm Allison. Thanks for joining me for Where I'm From, number 102. Karen is going to be joining me, and I'm going to invite her right now because that will just get us off to the right space. But Masters, and I am enjoying it a lot, and I feel really grateful because we're talking about it in our book club. Hi, Karen.
Hey, hey, Alice.
See how easy that
It
was?
was so easy. Thank you for giving me confidence.
You're welcome. So many people have anxiety about
I,
it. And
I
yeah,
do definitely. The technology just freaks me out a little bit.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes Instagram does not cooperate, and
Mhm.
that is out of our control. So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it does cooperate, it's pretty
yeah.
easy. If it doesn't, well, then we just start over and try again. So
Well, I'm really glad we didn't have any problems for this portion of.
I'm glad too. I'm always relieved when it goes well. So, how are you this morning?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah, there's going to be a hurricane here in Los Angeles, which seems very counterintuitive.
I heard that. Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope
Yeah.
things go well for you and everybody else.
Yeah, it's just like, are you sure? Doesn't seem like.
Yeah, all these once in a hundred
Yeah.
year weather events we're having. It,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
says something about what's going on.
Yes, it sure does. So, is there anything you'd like to say or talk about before you read your poem, or do you just want to do it and get it done?
Well, I'll just tell you that, and I mentioned this to you. This was so fun, and I don't write very poetry very, very rarely, and I don't read a lot of poetry. I don't really get it. I feel like I have to really study it. I
Mhm.
want to kind of master the understanding a little bit more.
Mhm.
But something about the format of this, it was like a bunch of little prompts, and that really made
Yeah.
it kind of easier to put together. And then I had so much fun. And I think I heard another one of your guests talk about how do you weed out, how do you select like all these great memories, how do you select the one? So
Mhm.
hopefully I came up with some that, give a little picture into my family.
You definitely did. And I'm glad you had fun. I think it can be daunting writing
Mm-hmm.
a poem when you feel like you're a
Right,
poet. It was for me.
right.
But it's for everyone.
Yeah,
And that's something that George Ella certainly talked about when I've spoken with her. And I appreciate that a lot in general, just this kind of removing the gates and saying, this is for
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. And this format is very accessible. I
Yeah.
feel like it's very accessible for the writer and also the listener or reader.
Yeah, and I love hearing about where everyone's from. So
Great.
if you're ready, go right
Okay, I'm
ahead.
ready.
Okay.
Okay, I am from the 32-gallon garbage bin in the family room. No space in the kitchen. No cabineted can could contain our family of 8. Appearances unimportant to Dad. Fighting about it, a lost cause for Mom. From NDOS, Scott single-ply toilet paper, store brand, everything else crammed into a trio of Kroger carts. I am from a mid-century raised ranch, then simply called new. A speck in a maze of suburban neighborhoods. 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, no frills, but filled with characters. I am from a big backyard dotted with maple trees, threadbare grass worn smooth from a dozen sneakers, landmines of dog poop. The rain will wash them away. I'm from nativity scene reenactments in the living room. I was Mary. Christmas Eve procession singing Away in a Manger. Power tools, super glue, and duct tape, 8 MacGyver minds in motion. From Don and Pat, or Patricia, as Dad called her, or Mrs. Donald S. Rampolla, as she signed her checks, while I looked on, wondering what became of Pat. I'm from being late, so I became chronically early. From forgetfulness, that didn't escape me. From getting lost, no, that is mine alone. I'm from look it up in the dictionary and turn the other cheek and do unto others better than they do unto you. I'm from the Steel City-ians, guys. Green milk for St. Patrick's Day, sour Broughton twice a year, yuck. Pounding the kitchen table, Dad yelled, "Mangia," the extent of his Italian vocabulary. From Saturday morning rampolla cakes, plate-sized whole wheat skim milk pancakes, Hostess donuts stashed in the freezer, Mom asking, where did they all go? Only I knew. From Dad's driving, the checker station wagon with crank windows and no radio, a barf bag for me. Dramamine settled my stomach, but knocked me out. No wonder I was always lost.
Thank you, Karen.
It was so fun to read. It was more fun than it was to write. I just really
good. I'm so glad. Sometimes the reading is hard too, like
yeah.
for people's nerves. So I'm glad it was enjoyable.
Well, I admit my heart is pounding a little bit. You know, it's like that adrenaline rush. So that's okay.
Yeah. Well, so a family of 8, was it 8 children or 6 children?
6 kids and 2 parents. Okay. And various 4-legged and 8-legged pets.
So so right before we went live, or not right before, but pretty close, you changed the garbage bag size.
I did. Garbage
cans.
Yeah. So, you know, we had the family room adjacent to the kitchen. In the kitchen, you know, there was a huge table to seat all of us, so not a lot of room in the kitchen. So this big garbage bin in the family room, and that was our kitchen garbage and whatever garbage or trash we had. And, you know, I remembered that, and I Googled it because I thought, well, how big would that be? And I must have misread what I looked at or whatever. I came up with 10 gallons. And then this morning I was looking at my normal size kitchen can, you know, trash can. And I thought, I could probably put 10 gallons of water in there. The thing we had was huge.
Like a standard garbage can. Like I'm imagining like a circular garbage, like one you'd have outside back then.
And I talked to my sister this morning, read her the poem, and she says, Karen, it was more like 64 gallons. So we both Googled it, and I said, oh, it could not have been 64. Really?
Yeah.
So we kind of agreed maybe it was 32, but still huge, just huge. Yeah.
That's a great.
For my dad, that was just very practical.
Right.
You know, my mom just, you know, chose her battles and let that go.
Wow. I think being in a family, a particularly large one, you definitely have to choose your battles. Like, and that there were 7 of us, but we were much more spread out. So I think were you pretty close together?
Yeah. Well, I think 12 years from oldest to youngest. So, you know, the top 4 were kind of close together.
Yeah. And then I just loved all the details, and it was I can feel that you had fun doing it because it was like, it just felt like very celebratory of where you came from.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know, when I first started working on this, I felt like I was digging into the negative stuff. And there, you know, we were a normal family. There was some negative stuff. I think when we were little, kind of what's represented in this poem, we were, you know, still loving each other and pretty tight and, you know, pretty cool with each other. And then, you know, those teenage years, I think, got a little bit difficult, more so for some of us than for others. And just the realization of, okay, this isn't the perfect family. There are some things that are missing, maybe that I personally, you know, could have used growing up. But, you know, I wrote that and I thought, but that's not what I want to portray. I don't want to portray, you know, the faults in this family. I mean, they are there, and some of them are in here, but I want to really portray the good stuff. I wanted to focus on the good stuff. And even the garbage can in the family room, I mean, it was good stuff because that's who we were, and that just worked for us.
Yeah, and I think there is, I mean, it's interesting you talk about making choice, because I think as writers, we make a lot of choices, what we want to include and what we don't want to include, and what motivates us. And I think different projects, you might make different choices.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I've written about some of the, you know, I have a memoir that came out.
Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you. Excuse this frog in my throat. It's just taken up residence there all the time. Excuse me. You know, and I talked a little bit more about, you know, my parents being so nice and how that was really a detriment to me growing up, that there were things that I didn't learn that I should have learned. And I kind of thought, and I didn't talk about them a lot in the book because I didn't want it to be mean spirited, and they were wonderful people and wonderful parents. But I feel like, okay, I said my piece there in the book about that little part that was missing for me. And here I just wanted to show, you know, we were fine and a little kooky and a little, different in some ways than other families, but, close and loving,
I think every family is a little that's
yeah,
the thing that is tricky to navigate, I think, especially looking back. Like every family is different, and then you need to figure out what that means to you.
right.
Like how it
Yeah.
affects you, and is
Yeah.
it something you need to dig into further, or is it just the nature of being
Right.
human?
Right.
Because I was actually telling my husband about the family who lived near us, who they were a family of, I think, 10, and they had like 23 turtles, and I was so jealous of them because
Yeah.
I thought that seemed like a dream. And the girls had
Uh-huh.
braids, and they all went to Catholic school, and they had the uniforms, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure that's a little unusual. Our family was unusual in a different way, so
Yeah.
it was. But I loved how in your poem you said, you lived in a mid-century modern house, but that was just new.
It was new.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that sort of um, is echoed through your
Mm-hmm.
poem. Like this idea that what I had has a name now, but back
Right.
then it was just
Yeah.
what it was.
It was what it was.
Yeah.
And I have a memory of being 3 or 4, kind of running around in this unfinished house, that was the house that we moved into. And I don't remember exactly. I was somewhere around 3 or 4 when we moved in, but yeah, I mean, it was brand new. And it was big and not at all fancy. My mom made it as nice as she could, but it was just kind of very functional,
Yeah.
and it worked really well for us.
Yeah. I mean, that was the point, right? Was
Right.
the functionality of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And all those I really like the crank because of course that was the same kind of car. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember when automatic windows came out, I thought they were the height of luxury.
Oh,
I,
yeah. And a radio, again, I remember being, I don't know, 8 or 10. I remember being in a car showroom, and my dad was sitting in the chair with the salesman there. And I think the salesman asked him, "And do you want a radio?" And my dad said yes. And we were all like, "Oh, like a radio? Like, really? We're going to have a car with a radio?" It was just so thrilling,
yeah.
So
Yeah.
just shows you how, the society has changed, and our expectations on what we take for granted. I mean, a radio and a car. Of course, you don't need radio now,
right,
because everybody has their cell phones. So there you go. Maybe they'll go back to no radios again.
Yeah. They sometimes, I still listen to mine sometimes, just, for, I think, a little bit of nostalgia to sort of just turn it on and see what happens.
Yeah.
To not have so much control,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm listening to this, I've made a choice, but I'm just going to turn this on and see what happens.
Yeah. I just like the ease. I push a button and it comes on. I have my preset stations. I don't have to make a lot of decisions. It's easy.
Yeah.
So I do too. Yeah.
Do you have any other reflections or thoughts on the experience, or anything you'd like to share?
Well, it's interesting getting back to my dad's driving, and we did have a checker station wagon, and I really do have an extraordinarily poor sense of direction. In fact, when I was talking to my sister, she's like, "Yeah, but Karen, you're not the only one with the bad sense of direction." She said, "I get lost, and Dad used to get lost." And I said, "Yeah, but you're talking about getting lost on a city street. I'm talking about, this is really embarrassing, getting lost in a building where I worked through the 3 years that I worked there. I'm talking about getting lost in the stacks of the library when I went to college all through my senior year." So when I say getting lost, like, really, I think I was dropped in my head at some point, because I
don't mean to laugh, but
I don't have that gene,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really is a gene, I guess. I mean, it is. I'm just listening to you. Like, it's interesting because I don't really much get lost. And I felt like it was because I was the family navigator oftentimes. Like, I was
Oh,
in charge of
yeah,
getting people places, even though I was young.
yeah.
And now I see that I have actually delegated it to my younger child. He is very good at it.
Oh,
And so I will turn and be like, where are we parked?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. And I think for me, and I only had this realization recently. So I grew up in
Yes.
Pittsburgh, and it's a hard city to get around, anyways.
Hmm.
And my dad kind of, not that there were a lot of direct routes, but if there was one, my dad would not take it. He would take you like back roads through all these neighborhoods, and his driving was safe, but really like stop and go all the time.
Yeah.
I was always car sick. So you put
Yeah.
all together, and I think, I really just, it was like that developmental stage when you start having a sense of where you are and how to get places. And I never developed that because I was always about to puke. So, uh, yeah.
Yeah. I
So,
think that makes a lot of sense,
yeah,
actually. Like you just didn't, because, we know so much more about the brains now and
yeah,
how we use certain pathways in our
yeah,
brains. And the more we use them, the easier they are to use. And so you just weren't using that part. You were just passed out
yeah,
or trying
exactly.
not to puke.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting. A stop and
Yeah.
go driving is the
Yeah.
worst,
Yeah. It was pretty bad. Yeah. Oh,
especially in those station wagons because
yeah.
they're just boats. I
Yeah.
mean, there's
Yeah.
something about them that I feel I don't drive in cars like that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt sort of moreless.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't feel the sense of the tires on the ground and me in the car.
Yeah.
It just kind of felt like you're floating around
Yeah.
in
Interesting.
space. And
Yeah.
that doesn't help with the motion because I also have motion sickness, but
Mm-hmm.
not as bad as you.
Yeah.
And certain cars, you just see them and be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to get in that.
And
It's not going to go well.
I think too, there's something about, I just have this sense because when I first started dating my husband in college, I think for a time it wasn't a station wagon, but it was a big, big car that was his dad's, like a big old,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
car, some kind of green car. And I would get car sick. It was a sedan, and all sedans look the same to me, so I don't know. But, I would get in this car and almost immediately feel car sick. And
Mm-hmm.
my philosophy is there's something about either big cars or certain cars where maybe the exhaust fumes work their way into the car, and that would just make me
Yeah.
really car sick. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too with this poem. So writers often talk about not knowing how you feel about something, or kind of not knowing a part of yourself until you write it down. And
Yeah.
I have not always had that experience. Writing, even though I wrote a book, writing is very laborious and challenging for me. But
Mm-hmm.
in this poem, I did kind of connect some dots that I had not done before. And so that also made it fun and really just satisfying to have that experience.
I love that. I think that's one of the biggest motivations for me to continue working on my memoir because it's not so laborious, but it's also, I do fight with my own, like, why am I doing this? It seems self-indulgent, whatever.
Yeah.
But it is the self-discovery
Mm-hmm.
that is baked into the process. And
Right.
Dinty Moore just had a quote that I read just like recently, you probably did too on social media, that you need to go into projects with like boundless curiosity and the
Yeah.
willingness to explore, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. He was talking about his book that he
Yeah.
wrote. Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt like, oh yeah, I've really found that to be the case. Like it's sort of like I'm detecting my own life
Yeah. Yeah.
and having these discoveries of like, oh yeah, I felt like that. Because I think
Yeah.
lots of times you're just trying to
Right.
survive or get through it,
Right.
or
Right.
whatever's going on. So
Yeah.
that makes me really happy
Yeah.
that you had that experience with this poem.
It
Because
is.
it's such a, like, honestly, on the scale of things, it's a pretty painless
Right.
process as far as writing goes.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So that's a happy ending.
Definitely.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Karen. I'm so
Thank,
glad that thank you for your patience. It takes a while for the turns to happen. So thank you for your patience and for
well,
participating.
and thank you for your patience. And I'll tell your viewers, not only did I realize a half an hour before we were supposed to go live that the 10-gallon garbage bin was actually a 32-gallon, but after I turned this into you, Allison, I found like a word that I had repeated and another word. And I'm so grateful that you were gracious enough to allow me to make those changes.
Yes, because I know it feels, it's personal and you want it to be right. And
Yeah.
so I have no problem with changes. Like
Well,
and I know that people feel vulnerable in a different way with this
hmm
than they might with other things, so
yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
you're welcome. Well, have a lovely day. Thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, you too, and stay safe. I hope you have
Thank
good
you.
weather and
I hope
better
so
weather
too.
for you.
It's the headline is like, but that's life
Yeah,
right
it is.
now.
Yeah, go with the flow. All right.
Okay, well, have a lovely weekend. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks so much, Allison. Take care.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.